Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hi, it's Jessa. Welcome back to the Better Sex Podcast. This is where I come every week to share interviews and information, and I hope inspiration to help you make your best possible sex life. And I do it because I really believe that sex is important. Relationships, our intimate connection, our sense of our own sexuality, and then sharing that with a partner, all of that really matters. It's a huge factor in our quality of life, and I believe in the quality of our relationships. And I think when that's going well, we have more energy to put our good stuff out in the world. So that's why I'm here. I'm interviewing today Emily Nagoski, who wrote one of my favorite books, one of the books I recommend the most to my clients. It's called Come As You Are, the surprising new science that will transform your sex life. Maybe you've read it. If you haven't, I would highly recommend it. She is a sex educator, and she has been teaching, for many, many years, and was inspired to write the book when a particular human sexuality class of hers, they had a very challenging semester. They really pushed her to get to the science behind things and ask questions. And at the very end, their takeaway was, I'm normal. Nothing's wrong with me. And that was such a powerful response of her class that it inspired her to write the book. So I'm just so happy to have her on the show. We're getting to talk about some of the most important concepts in the book. These are relevant to virtually everyone. This is so crucial to taking the stress out of sex and making your experience, normal and successful and harmonious. I really hope you enjoy it. Emily, thank you so much for being on the show today.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, this is a delight. I recommend your book to tons of my clients. We talk about it a lot, and I'm just thrilled to go to the source, and get to the bottom of some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Could I ask you first, what's the story behind actually deciding to write the book?
Well, I was teaching at Smith College, a class called Women's Sexuality. It was the very first day of the semester. I was teaching the anatomy class, which is what I always teach the first day.
Yeah.
And a student raised her hand and said, Emily, could you tell us the evolutionary origin of the hymen? And I had been a sex educator for 15 years already by that point. And I had never even wondered what the evolutionary origin of the hymen was.
I'm sitting here thinking, I've never asked that question.
I answered it. Much less had to find out the answer. Yeah. So I was like, this is not going to be an ordinary semester. This is going to be... Yeah. So it was not an ordinary semester. We kicked each other's asses. Those students.
Wow.
I gave them all the science I could find. They pushed me really hard. And at the end of this really challenging semester, the last question on the final exam, I decided would be, what was one important thing you learned? Just tell me any one important thing you learned. And you get the 2 points, which is really important.
Right.
Just take the question seriously. And I thought they were going to say, the evolutionary biology or attachment theory or responsive desire. But no, I had 187 students in that class, and more than half of them just wrote something like, I learned I'm normal.
Oh, wow.
I'm normal. Just because I'm different from other women doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever graded final exams, but it's not usually like this. I was sitting in my office grading with tears in my eyes.
Wow.
Feeling like something really important had just happened in that class that helped my students access a feeling that, as they said, I can now live my life with confidence and joy.
Yeah. Well, I see that in my therapy practice, right? I feel like that's the first message to give couples that come in with sexual problems is you're normal. It's totally normal to struggle. Yeah. Your problems are normal. Everything makes sense. And there's this, this huge relief, and then we can work on it.
So that was the moment that I decided to write Come As You Are. A mere 4.5 years later, there it was.
Yeah.
Out there in the world.
Right. A long gestation, but
right.
So could you start sort of on that note, talk about this idea that we have all the same parts just arranged differently. I love the way you put that.
Yeah, it starts from the most literal anatomical organization. Everyone's body is made of the same parts as everyone else's. They're just organized in different ways. And that includes the sort of, if you're born with the package of genitals that makes everybody around you go, it's a boy. That's one sort of standard organization. And then there's the other organization that on the day you're born, everyone around you goes, it's a girl. And that's another standard organization, but it's all the same parts. So if you look at the next time you get up close and personal with a scrotum, for example, you'll see that there's a seam that goes down the center. It's called the scrotal raphe.
Okay.
And that's actually where the scrotum has knit together during gestation, which if things have been a little different hormonally or chromosomally, that's where that person would have developed labia instead.
Okay.
See, it's very similar kind of skin. It's very stretchy. Hair
Right.
on it. And so it's the same parts, just organized in a slightly different way. And it also refers to the ways that we vary from each other. So if somebody does have a vulva, theirs isn't going to look like somebody else who also has a vulva. It's all the same parts, just organized in a unique way. And very slight differences in organization, it turns out, can make a big impact on the way we experience our sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
So one fun example, I think, is that one of the best predictors of whether or not a person has orgasms from vaginal stimulation alone is the distance between the clitoris and the urethral opening.
Yeah.
Which is like, that's not something anybody has any control over.
Right.
And only a minority of people have orgasms from vaginal stimulation alone.
Right.
And it turns out one of the few significant predictors is this small anatomical difference that nobody has any control over. That it's not like, again, there's no evolutionary purpose to it. It's just one of the ways people vary.
It's a roll of the dice, right? Like, it's either close enough to get rubbed on or not.
And we happen to live in a culture that has decided that orgasms from vaginal penetration are like the good kind.
I'm actively working to dispel that idea.
My whole life apparently is devoted to teaching people like, look, only about a quarter of women reliably orgasm from vaginal stimulation alone. The rest sometimes, rarely, or never do. And all orgasms, whatever their modality, is equally good. The only measure of an orgasm is whether you wanted and liked it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not even like you have to have them, right? Like it's,
right.
I say it's nice. It's nice to have one if you want one, to be able to have one if you want. But yes,
they're totally a cherry on the sundae.
Right.
Some people don't even like cherries.
So speak to, I mean, this isn't something I've talked about on the podcast before, but in the spectrum of disorders of sexual development, or what we might call intersex conditions, we're talking about the same thing, right? Slight variations in the way these different parts show up.
Yep. When you look at intersex genitals, which vary from each other a lot, this is an umbrella term for a lot of different conditions.
Right.
They're called intersex because, broadly speaking, they're not organized in the obvious, it's a boy way, and they're not in the obvious, it's a girl way, but there's sort of something in between. There's a phallus that on some bodies we would call a penis, and on other bodies we would call a clitoris, depending sort of on where the urethral opening is located. Is it at the tip of the phallus? Is it along the shaft? Is it at the base? Those are sort of the variations that we can expect to see.
Yeah, right. So all the same parts. What matters is getting to know your own and your partners, I suppose, right? And being clear about what's pleasurable and not to each person.
Right. And expect it to vary from person to person. So just because you have a good sexual understanding of your previous partner's genitals does not at all predict your ability to be good friends with the next set of genitals that you encounter. Like, you have to get to know them as individuals.
Yeah.
They have very different personalities. And again, all the same parts, just organized in different ways. And all the organizations are equally good and healthy.
Yeah. Fundamental point. We'll stress that over and over, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So part of what I remember reading your book was, I can't remember what it stands for with the SES and SIS, but this basic concept of, well, I'll let you explain it.
Yeah. SES and SES. My editor was like, don't ever use those because people don't remember them and they sound too much alike. So I try not to use them. Mostly I talk about the accelerator, which is the sexual excitation system, SES accelerator. And there's the sexual inhibition system or brakes, the accelerator and brakes. This is the dual control model. It's the dual control because there's two components to it.
Right, right.
And the accelerator is the mechanism in your brain that notices all the sexually relevant information in your environment. So that's everything that you see, hear, smell, touch, taste, or imagine that your
Okay.
brain codes as a sex-related stimulus, and it sends the turn-on signal all over your body, including your genitals.
Okay.
And it's functioning at a low level all the time, including right now. So the fact that you and I are talking about sex is just a little bit sex-related. So we have just
Right.
a little bit of turn-on signal. At the same time that that's happening in parallel, thank goodness, our brake is noticing all the reasons not to be turned on right now. Everything that we see, hear, smell, touch, taste, or imagine that our brain perceives as a potential threat. And it sends a turn off signal everywhere in our bodies. So the arousal process is actually this dual control process of both turning on the ons and turning off the offs. And it turns out when people are struggling around anything related to their sexuality, arousal, desire, orgasm, it's less often because there's not enough stimulation to the gas pedal, and much more often because there's too much stimulation to the brake.
Yeah. Now, what about, I mean, I'm imagining there are people for whom those sexual stimuli that our brain is picking up actually hits the brakes, right? Like
Oh,
it's
yeah.
not always an excitation response to, right?
So, especially a combination of things. Either if you grew up in a very sexually shaming culture, so that
Mm-hmm.
your body has learned that to be sexually aroused is for something dangerous to be happening, or to experience sexual trauma.
Right.
If you have sex used against you as a weapon, your brain learns that anything that's sex related is also a potential threat. And so it hits the brake at the same time. One of the reasons why trauma therapy can be so effective with around sexuality is because you can practice the experience of arousal in a safe place by yourself or with a partner you really profoundly trust. And your body can learn this is the experience of arousal and I am safe. I'm experiencing this feeling and nothing unsafe is happening. And your body learns how to let the brake go in the presence of, at first, just very low levels of arousal or pleasure. And you can gradually increase the levels of arousal and pleasure. And your brake will learn how not to turn on.
Right. So you're not like riding the brake at the same
Yeah,
time.
because if you
Yeah.
try to drive somewhere with your foot on the gas and a foot on the brake, you might get where you want to go, but it'll take a lot more gas.
Yeah, not very
It'll
effectively.
be very slow. Nobody's going to have a good time. Yeah.
Right, right. Okay, so people again vary in those response systems, right? They're
And the sensitivity of them. Yeah.
yeah,
Most
their
of them,
sensitivity and what kind of stimuli hits them in
oh,
which
yeah.
way, like all that kind of thing.
It's all the only innate sexually relevant stimulus is genital sensations. Everything else is learned.
Right, right.
So, gradually over the process of our early life and into adulthood, our body sort of links up what makes our genitals tingle, what causes an sort of emotional or internal experience of arousal, and what the external stimuli are. And it changes over our lifespan too. It doesn't get like set in concrete at any point in our life. It changes as our experience changes. And the same goes for what hits the brake. All sorts of things can hit the brake. The most common, obviously, is stress.
Yeah, and this is something I found fascinating in the book too. You talked about different people's responses to stress, right?
Yeah,
And some
people
people
vary.
approach and some people withdraw. I mean, even to positive
Oh
stimuli,
yeah,
right?
I had a couple actually, two students who were it was finals week and they were both really stressed out, and they came and sat down on the couch in my office and said, "Okay, so it's finals. We're both really stressed out. The stress makes my sexual interest go way up, and the sex makes her sexual interest go way down.
Yeah.
Which one of us is doing it right?"
Yeah,
Like,
that's always a question, trying to track
right, yeah. Which
somebody's
one of us is broken? One of us must be broken. No, neither of you is broken. Your brains are wired slightly differently. For some people, stress, depression, anxiety, loneliness can actually increase your interest in sex. Won't necessarily increase your pleasure, but it can increase your interest. And for other people, it can really slow things down and decrease interest. For some people, it has no effect. But for
Mhm.
a lot of people, the majority, it really slows things down or turns things off.
Yeah. Okay, but some people activated like that, it's like approach things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially if you either have a really sensitive accelerator. So if you're the kind of person who like the least little thing can make you go, oh, then you might be a person who, when you're stressed out, becomes more interested in sex. Basically, it's your brain wanting to use the pleasure and release of sex as a way to manage the negative affect, the stress, depression, anxiety, loneliness, repressed rage, whatever it is, we've all got it.
Right.
And sometimes it's if you have a particularly not sensitive break that your brain tries to use the pleasure, the distraction, the release, the relaxation of sex to cope with the negative feelings.
Yeah. So I'm getting a little out of order in terms of what I was thinking about asking you, but it raises a question in my mind about what in the world do people do when they're mismatched on this, right? We've got somebody who easily has access to their accelerator and they're partnered with somebody that really struggles with a high sensitive break.
They negotiate. That was 10 years ago, and that couple bought a house last year and are adopting a child now. So,
You mean that couple in your book?
Yeah, that specific couple that came to my office when they were students. They're still together all these years later.
I didn't realize they were in a relationship sitting on your couch. I thought they were talking about their respective partners. Okay.
No, they together as a couple were experiencing these very different ways of experiencing sexuality.
Yeah.
But they shared what couples do share. If they have we know from the research that couples who sustain a strong sexual connection over multiple decades have two things in common, and neither of them is like a really constant desire to put their tongues in each other's mouths. Like desire is not part of the equation. What matters is that they have a strong friendship at the foundation of their relationship, which this pair totally had going for them. They had a great deal of respect for each other.
Mm-hmm.
They admired each other a lot, and they had a spectacular sense of humor about this stuff.
Yeah.
So they could literally laugh as they were asking which one of us is doing this wrong.
Right.
Like they sort of knew that, so they weren't too judgmental, and they hadn't like diagnosed one or the other as being the broken one, which I'm sure you see a lot.
I do.
And the second thing these couples have in common to sustain a strong sexual connection over multiple decades is that they prioritize sex. They decide that it matters. So in a couple where there's a differential, the partner who has lower interest might not be like, oh boy, can't wait to do it, but like loves and respects their partner, really knows that their partner wants to have sex and wants their partner to be happy, likes the sex that they have when they have it.
Right.
And so is perfectly happy to be like, yeah, all right, let's have sex tonight. In the same way that if your partner was like, I'm really in the mood for pot roast tonight. And you could be like, I hadn't been planning on that, but sure, we can make that happen.
Yeah. Well, that certainly opens up the whole conversation about responsive desire, which, I'm always teaching people because they look at me kind of googly eyed, like, what? That's real. I mean, it's okay. And, how to accommodate that. Right. So could you define that for the listeners first?
Sure. Absolutely. So when people think of sexual desire, they usually think of it as being this spontaneous desire. So you're just walking down the street or you're having lunch and just suddenly out of the blue, you would like to have some sex.
Well, your accelerator got hit, right? I saw
it's
something.
Like something or other happens. It's called spontaneous desire. It feels like it comes out of the blue. It emerges sort of in anticipation of pleasure. We're like just a little bit of stimulation and you're like ready to go.
Right.
And that is one of the normal healthy ways to experience sexual desire. But there's this other way called responsive desire, where spontaneous desire emerges in anticipation of pleasure. Responsive desire emerges in response to pleasure, which means that the pleasure comes first and you allow the desire to emerge in response to the pleasure.
Yeah.
So this is in a couple that's established for many years. This often shows up as scheduled sex, date sex. Where, you get the childcare organized, you throw the last of the dishes in the dishwasher, you tromp upstairs at Saturday at 3:00, you, me, and the red underwear because you said you were going to. You put your body in the bed, you let your skin touch your partner's skin, and your body remembers, oh, right, I like this person. I like this. And it doesn't matter that like 5 minutes before you got in bed, all you were thinking about was the dishes and the laundry and childcare.
Yeah, and this is how somebody with less desire and certainly responsive desire can show up on purpose, right? And remember, yeah, I wasn't thinking about pot roast, but sure, let's get going. We'll see if, as I say to clients, maybe the engine will turn over.
Yeah. I like pot roast.
Yeah, it's not going to happen every time, but
Yes. Yeah, there are times when you show up. One of the stories I tell about me. I travel a lot for work because I do a lot of teaching. And man, if we didn't schedule sex, it would basically never happen. And it doesn't always. Just because we scheduled a thing doesn't mean sex is what's going to happen. Sometimes, this one time in particular, you get there, I show up and I just burst into tears and then fall asleep. My husband's so patient, so kind. Yeah. I'm sure there was a part of him that was like, and we're not having sex today.
Right.
But he was just so gentle and caring and attuned to me in that moment that even though nothing happened then, it set the stage for things happening later because I felt so cared for, and loved and seen and held. And
right. Well, you've got that friendship thing going on that you talked about.
Absolutely. Yeah, we like and admire each other. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the way I put it with my clients is to schedule the opportunity for sex.
Yep.
Not for sex itself. So you that responsive desire requires opportunity, and you start. It's a maybe. Let's see what happens. And and you both have to be okay if it doesn't. And
go. I'm increasingly hearing from couples where things can really go wrong is when you get there and there's too much of an expectation about what's going to happen next.
Right.
That expectation, that sense of obligation, the performance dread can just shut everything down. You have to be genuinely open to whatever happens.
Yeah. And both people do, right? You can't, you have both need to share that understanding that, and really, it was interesting. I interviewed Beverly Whipple recently, and she was talking about a model she has that so many people have a staircase model of sex.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Start with, kiss and take the clothes off, and you're gradually moving up towards, penetrative sex and orgasm or something, as if everybody's heterosexual. And she likes the circle model, which this was just different language than something I'd talked about, right? But where everything's on a circle and there's no hierarchy. So showing up, fooling around a little bit, kissing, touching, that's just as good as intercourse.
Yeah.
So
unless you are carrying around this cultural script that there is one thing that counts as sex and nothing else is good enough, particularly if you feel like your partner not wanting to do whatever the thing is that you consider to be sex is not just a rejection of that one specific behavior, but a rejection of you.
Right.
Like your whole personhood and your relationship. Like people tie their identity to
I know.
behaviors.
And as I try to explain to people, as I take that apart in the therapy office, right? It's like, if you start making sex about proof that you're desirable, that's not very engaging sex, or it's not very sexy. So it's a trap for people, I know.
It absolutely opens the door to people faking it.
Yeah. Yeah, that too.
Like, if you need me to prove that you are lovable, then okay, let's do this. Then there, do you feel lovable now? Hooray.
Right. And you can't do that for too long. I mean,
no, it leads to very bad things.
Right. It does. Hey, I'm just taking a quick little break in the middle of the show. Most of you probably know, if you've been listening at all, that I have written a new book called Sex Without Stress. But what you may not know is that I have developed an online course to support you through the process. The book has a lot in it. It's a do-it-yourself process to totally transform your sex life, but it's hard to do it. And it's hard to do it alone without support. So I have been looking for a way to create an environment that's supportive and could help you actually get this stuff done. So what I've done is create an 8-week course. There are webinars that you can watch live or you can watch later. There's materials, there are exercises and directions, and then I'm going to offer live online office hours. This is where you can get questions answered and get input on your situation. It's not therapy, but it's a place to come and help you move through the process. The next cohort starts January 28th, 2019, taking enrollment all the way up until then. You can learn more at sexwithoutstress.com. Easy to find the online course information there if you want some more information. I would love to have you join me. Do you have tips or, I mean, I know this is, everybody's different, right? But what do people do that have maybe really sensitive brakes? I mean, they're not broken, but is there any way to retune the car a little bit to access more of their desire?
And when people's brakes are really sensitive, that is the sort of sexual response profile that is the most challenging. Those folks have the most difficulty with arousal, desire, orgasm. I have found that they're most successful when they really embrace the idea that their brake is sensitive and think really systematically about what hits their brake and what can they do to get rid of the stuff that hits their brake. Some of those things are going to be easy. Cold feet is one. Like,
right.
put on some socks,
Right.
grit on the sheets, change those sheets. Afraid somebody's going to walk in, lock the door. Like,
Yeah.
I see people worried and feeling like these things shouldn't hit their brake. They shouldn't be worried. You know what? It's not about that.
Yeah.
It does. So you do a simple, easy thing, and that frees up your brake a little. A slightly more complicated version. I met a woman who she thought through like what context really worked for her, where she and her partner had great sex. And it was this one specific vacation house that they visited was just the best. And she was like, why? Why this one? And it turns out it's because it's a very old house where the bed is built into the wall. So there was no squeaking sound and they had multiple small children. So they literally are building a new house and they designed it to have the bed built into the wall.
So say that's a little bit of an excessive
solution,
but
but you know what? If you know that that's a factor,
yeah,
and you have the opportunity, another couple literally redesigned their bathroom because they realized that it was the garden bathtubs at the bed and breakfast where they stayed on vacation that really did it. That really like opened up the sense of connection because they could take these baths together in this really large tub, and it built a connection that they both felt good about. And it actually became like the planning of it, choosing tile and stuff.
Right.
Bathrooms, I don't know the details, but that felt like their foreplay because they were thinking about how they were building intimacy in their relationship.
Yeah. And of course, the message that's so important here is the brakes aren't broken. It's not about retuning those. It's about working. I mean, if both
working with the context.
Yeah. And if both people really understand that and work together to, improve the environment and the context, that'll make a difference.
And there are some things that are more difficult. Trauma is a longer term fix usually.
Yeah.
That's not just, you can't just change your socks and everything's going to be okay.
Right.
But trauma does heal as long as you give it the time and space that it needs.
Yeah.
Sexual shame, same thing. Body self-criticism is another almost universal one.
Yeah.
Where people feel like until their body conforms with some specific culturally constructed aspirational beauty ideal, they're not allowed to have pleasure, that they don't deserve access to all the pleasure that their body can provide. And that's totally not true. And one of the big things that I spend a lot of time talking about now is body image and coming to embrace your body precisely as it is today and granting yourself permission to experience pleasure in this body right now.
Do you have some tips that you could share along those lines? Because
I know, again, easier said than done. And it wasn't even that easy to say. So there are several evidence-based strategies for developing a better relationship with your own body, for reducing body self-criticism. One of them is the mirror activity that I recommend all the time, which is you stand in front of a mirror naked or as close to naked as you can tolerate, and you write down everything you see that you like. And the first thing that happens, obviously, is your brain fills with all the noise and clutter of the stuff that your culture has taught you to believe is not okay about your body. That's fine.
Yeah.
Just set those thoughts aside you can have them literally any other time. Right now, you're just going to write down the things that you like, even if it's your eyelashes, if it is your kneecaps, if it is your soul, because you see that in your eyes, whatever you see that you like, and then do it again the next day. And then do it again the day after that, and then do it again the day after that. And it will gradually build up your immunity to those cultural messages that tell you that those parts of your body and the shape of your body is not totally okay and beautiful exactly the way it is. That's one. Second is to increase your exposure to images of bodies that don't conform to the culturally constructed aspirational ideal, and reduce your exposure to images that have been manipulated to make you feel like shit, basically.
Yeah, right. Which is all around us.
Yeah, like you can't go to the grocery store or the drugstore without being exposed to these images. It's like you can't. My sister calls it the bikini industrial complex.
Yeah.
Just like, I mean, you can't walk out the door, you can't put clothes on, you can't take clothes off without being forced to think about the shape and size of your body and whether or not it's acceptable.
Right.
So the more you can do to diminish your exposure to images that make you feel bad and increase your exposure to images that diversify your idea of what a beautiful body looks like, the more that changes your internalization of whether or not your body is okay.
And
Your
would you
integrated
just
food is great.
Google diverse body types, or where do people find those?
I can actually point you to one specific reference. Jess
Okay.
Baker, the militant baker, on her website has a list of body positive Instagram feeds and other websites of very diverse bodies that are tremendously celebratory of all the
Okay.
diversity. And at first, it's going to feel different. Lindy West says, look at pictures of fat bodies until you don't feel uncomfortable anymore.
Yeah.
Just keep looking at diversity. It will feel really uncomfortable at first, and it will gradually begin to feel completely normal and natural to celebrate every body, no matter what.
I will put that link in the show notes too, so people can
Great.
get that. Yeah. I interrupted you. Is there one more tip in there?
The third one is at the same time that you're beginning to notice the beautiful things about your body and to increase your exposure to bodies that are more diverse, also tune in to your body's needs. So when we're born, on the day we're born, most of us are lucky enough to be born surrounded by adults who are delighted to see us,
Mm-hmm.
who just love every roll and wrinkle and hair on our tiny little bodies. And no matter what, on that day, we are held as beautiful and perfect. And that tiny little body is full of needs. And it is the job of the adults around us to meet those needs and gradually teach us. When we scream, when we have this uncomfortable experience, they come and they talk to us and say, oh, what's the matter, honey? Are you hungry? Are you lonely? Are you cold? Oh, you were hungry? So we learn that that internal experience means that we were hungry. We
Mm-hmm.
learn that a different experience means that we were lonely, right?
Yeah.
And nothing has changed from that very first day. Nothing has changed in the fundamental, profound lovability and beauty of our bodies. Every single part of that is equally true. And the needs of our bodies are the same. It is giving us these signals, telling us what it needs. And a lot of us, especially women, walk around sort of from the neck up, shutting out the signals of our bodies, tuning in just to whether or not it conforms to an ideal. If our body isn't the right shape, we're not interested in what it has to say to us. So the more we can gently tune our attention into, especially the parts of our bodies that we feel most critical of, let them tell us oh, honey, what do you need? And listen in an affectionate way that we would turn toward any child in need as our best selves. The more we can build a relationship with our bodies that isn't adversarial, that is actually.
I was going to say, it's like we're at war with our bodies, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The bikini
At least a Cold War.
has tried to convince us that our bodies are the enemies, that our bodies are what's wrong, when in fact it is that all those messages that are the enemies.
Right.
Whispering to us and trying to convince us that they're our friend.
Yeah. Man, I hope everybody listening is finding some, relief in this conversation.
I could talk about this. It's chapter 5 of the second book that I was just reading. We're doing the proofread of it now, and I was just reading it today. So I'm like very invested in the body image stuff. I'm like super excited.
Do you want to tease just a bit about your second book?
Oh, sure. I'll tease way more than it. It's called Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. It's for women who feel overwhelmed and exhausted by everything they have to do, and yet still worry that they're not doing enough.
Right.
That's everyone I know.
Yeah, it's an awful lot of people I know.
Including me. And I wrote it with my sister, actually. I have an identical twin sister named Amelia, who's a choral conductor. And the reason it's not a sex book, it's a stress book.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because within the first 6 months of Come As You Are coming out, I traveled a lot of places, talked to a lot of different people, about what's in Come As You Are. And over, I heard, hey, all that sex science is great, Emily. Thanks so much for that. But man, that chapter on stress and feelings,
Yeah.
that was really important. So I told my sister this. I keep hearing all this sex science. I work so hard to get the science. And people really want to talk about their stress and their feelings. And she was like, no kidding. Because she is a conservatory trained musician. She's like, I got taught how to do it, unlike most people. So I knew how to do it on the podium. I knew how to do it on stage, but I didn't know how to do it in real life. And when I finally learned, she said, I'm pretty sure it saved my life.
Wow.
She told me twice,
Huh.
she said. And I remembered her in grad school. Imagine seeing your identical twin sister in a hospital gown crying. And I was like, we should write a book about that.
Yeah.
So that's what we did.
Cool. When is it expected to be published?
March.
Oh, okay. So that's less than 6 months, right? That's
available for pre-order.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And there's a whole chapter. Chapter 5 is about body image.
Okay.
Chapter 1 is completing the cycle, which if you remember from Come As You Are, in chapter 4, when I'm talking about emotional context, I talk about stress.
Yeah.
Stress response cycle. That's chapter 1 right there. Because people were like, completing the cycle. Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Is there anything else I didn't ask you about Come As You Are that I should have, that you want to talk about?
Can I just talk quickly about context?
Yes.
I will skip, I want to talk about the nucleus accumbens and the nerdy brain science, but the most important thing turns out to be this idea that, so if you imagine tickling is not everybody's favorite, I know, but you can at least hypothetically imagine a situation where you're already in a fun, flirty, playful, sexy kind of state of mind, and your certain special someone tickles you, and that can feel good and lead to other things.
Mm-hmm.
But if the exact same certain special someone tries to tickle you when you're pissed off at them,
yeah,
you want to punch them in the face. And the weird thing about that, it's exactly the same sensation, but the perception is the opposite because your brain actually changes how it interprets a sensation depending on the emotional context. Like, what is your brain chemistry in that moment? It changes how it interprets the sensation coming in from your peripheral nervous system. So very often people get asked, I need to, I don't know what turns my partner on. I try one thing and they like it. And the next time I try that exact same thing and they don't like it.
Right.
And they think their partner's crazy or sending mixed signals.
Yeah.
No, the context was totally different. It's not about touch me here because that hits my accelerator. Don't touch me there because it hits my brake. It's about creating a context that allows your brain to interpret as much of the world as possible as a safe, sexy, pleasurable place where you can trust your partner to touch you in almost any way and expect that it's going to lead good places.
Yeah, that's a crucial concept. I'm glad you remembered to bring it up because I hadn't asked. Because you're right, I hear that from people all the time. They look bewildered that they can't figure out their partner, and of course, the one who's shifted in their response, it's often clear to them. Like, I was mad at you, or I was I was in the middle of stuff, or whatever it is,
But there's this myth that it should be just turn the dial and hit the switch.
Like as if it's a mechanical, physical touch thing, as opposed to the other subtleties of our.
Yeah, this very complex neurological phenomenon that happens where the experience of pleasure emerges from the complete mix of all the different emotions that are happening in your body simultaneously.
Yeah.
That's why setting the stage is important, because it shifts the context. It shifts your emotional brain state into one that is receptive to affection and pleasure.
Yeah. Wonderful. So where can people learn more about you or follow you or, hear about your book when it's released?
These days, I'm mostly on Instagram because it is the one that exposes me to the least news.
Okay.
I'm just Nagoski on Instagram. Also on Twitter, I'm Emily Nagoski, but I'm there less often.
Okay.
My website is emilynagoski.com, and there's a map and a calendar of when I'm doing public events.
Okay, great. I'll put all that stuff on the show notes too, so people can easily access it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Can I? Oh, one more. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
I wanted to mention, because you are a therapist and you do this work, in August next year, there's going to be a Come As You Are workbook.
Oh.
That I'm currently working on. It's all worksheets and very practical. How do I apply that? That's all very well with the science, Emily, but what do I do with it?
Yeah.
So it's intended to be a very practical guide, and I'm almost done with it, and I expect it to come out next August.
Wonderful. Okay, I'll make sure to follow you on Instagram so I see the alerts once you've published it. So wonderful. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.